All right, in this video we are going to talk about exceptions in Python. So errors that occur when a program is executed are called runtime errors or exceptions. Okay, so that is when you go to run your program, at some point during the program an error happens and then your program doesn't complete. So just a really simple example that we've got for that is this program here. So you can see that what we've got is we're just getting input from the user. So here we prompt the user, enter an integer from 1 to 9 inclusive. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. And then we just spit the number back out to them. So if you run it and you enter an integer, it works like that. So the thing happens though, if you run this program and you enter some letters in there, right, then it's going to crash. And you can see it did not run to completion. We didn't get that message, you entered whatever number, because I entered some letters. So that is an error of an example of a runtime error or exception. So what happens when that happens is it generates an exception object. In this case, you can see it right here, value error. And it'll also give you a line here. It's line 1. And so the thing is this part worked fine, this input part. I entered some letters though, and then int tried to convert those letters to an int, and understandably got confused because, well, that's not an int. So Python was like, well, I don't know how to do that, and so it generated this error here. Okay, sometimes that's referred to as throwing an exception or error. So, and so that's what happens basically. So that's an example of a runtime error or exception. Those exceptions come in many different types. If you go to this link right here, you can see all of the different types of exceptions. There is an exception called base exception, and it is the parent or ancestor class of all of these other exceptions. And so if we run through, we can see some of the different types. Arithmetic error, that's when you try to divide by 0 or some other things. Buffer error, lookup error, assertion error, attribute error, and the list goes on about the different kinds of things that can happen here. Okay. Overflow error, syntax error, system error, type error, unbound local error, Unicode error, zero division error, and the list goes on. There's a lot of them. Okay. So when that happens, when your program throws an exception like that, you'll get this trace, and what you would want to do is kind of look at the line number, right, where it was generated, and then the type of exception that was generated. So this was a value error. Okay. So that's what this is referring to. An error message is displayed in the console indicating what type of exception object was generated. So when that happens, there is a way to try to keep your program up and running rather than letting it, crash, and that is through a try except statement. Okay, and so when you add a try and except statement into your code to try and circumvent, that error happening and the runtime error crashing your program, that's called error handling or exception handling. So the try except statement basically works like this. So you'll have a try, that's the keyword try, followed by a colon, and then a block of code. That block of code needs to be indented one level off of the try. And so that is the code. In that, you would place the code that may cause an exception. Okay? And so in this case, the case that we're looking at, that would be line 1 right here. So what we would do is do try and then add that code in here. And basically you're just your way of telling Python, hey, Python, keep an eye out for this code right here. It's known to cause some exception over here. Okay, so that's what you would do. All right, and next up, right, that after that block of code, you would it would be followed by an except clause there. So you use the keyword except, and then the type of the exception that caused that. So that would look like this. Except. And then you can see that you would put the type of exception. And for us, that was value error. So value error. Okay. And then inside this except clause, basically you would put the plan. That's the plan if something goes wrong. So you're saying to Python, hey, Python, watch this code right here. And then if a value error is thrown, then what you would do is to do something else. Okay, so one thing we could do is to quit, right? This, and so if we run that and now I enter some letters, you can see that I didn't get those error messages right here. So what ended up happening was that this was triggered, this threw an exception, and then it immediately jumps to the plan to do that. So when it comes to execution of this try and except, right, what it will do is to try and run through this code that's in this try block, okay? If everything goes fine and no exception is thrown, then it will run to all of those statements that are in that try block, and then it will skip the except code and continue on after that block. On the other hand, right, if an exception is thrown, then what will happen is that Python will look through these except clauses. You can have multiple of these except clauses in there, okay? And it will look for one that matches the exception that was thrown, okay? If it finds a match, then it will execute that code block in there and then continue on its way, okay? So the key there is as soon as that exception is thrown up here, right, as soon as that error happens, none of the other statements past that error are going to get executed in the try block. It's going to immediately jump to the other part there. So just as an example of that, if I added in here just print and then some message here. Okay, so if I run that, if I enter, say like 5, what's going to happen is that's perfectly fine. That's an int, and so it's going to store that in the value number. And then it's going to print some message, and then that's the last statement in the try block. It's going to go to the next line, which is it's going to skip the except block and go to the next line after the try except block, and that's going to be you entered 5. So that's what's going to happen. Oops, sorry. If I enter 5, so you can see that was printed. On the other hand, right, if I run this and I enter some letters in here, what's going to happen is an exception is going to get thrown on line 2 now that we saw before. That's going to be a value error. So it's going to immediately jump to this block down here and quit out of the program, okay? So you'll see that that some message doesn't get printed here. If I press enter, so it jumped to here, right, to the except clause. That's the plan, right, if a value error gets thrown, and then it executed quit, and that was it. That was the end of the program. If I didn't have quit in here, if I just had some other statement, it will try and keep going, okay? So if I enter some letters here, that's going to trigger a value error. That value error is going to jump down here to this except block. It's going to print blah, and then it's going to say you entered number. That's likely going to give another error down there because of the fact that number was never initialized properly. Okay, so here you can see it tried to go on to line 6, and that wouldn't work, right, because of the fact that a number is not defined at that point. Okay, So unless you tell it to quit out of there, it's going to try and keep going. Okay, so that's the execution of the try and except block, right? It will try to execute all of these statements in here. If all of the statements, if no exception is thrown, then it's going to skip the except block and move along its way. Okay. If some exception is thrown, it will try and match the type to one of these except blocks that you have down below. If it finds a matching type, then we'll execute those statements and continue on its way. If it can't find a matching statement in there, then it will crash. Okay, so that's the execution of the try and except block. All right, so that's it for this one. In the next video, we will run through this example again and try to add some more error handling into that program.